They say that a person's death is what best reveals their life. We get to know a person best by looking back at the end of their life over all that they lived. That's the best way for us to figure out what it all means. That's one of the things I love about my job, is I get to preside at funerals. It's a beautiful thing, actually. And I'll tell you, one of the things I love best is sitting around the kitchen table with the loved ones of someone who has died. It's such a powerful experience to hear them share all of the very best parts of their loved one's life. It's like we sift together through all of their life and find all of the jewels. And I hear things all the time that are moving. Just last month, I had a funeral for a guy whose daughter told me, "Oh yeah, Dad used to go into Stewart's at least once a month and buy everyone's coffee. He didn't know most of the people that were in there. He just needed to do something kind, and so he'd buy everyone's drinks." Someone else told me that their mother, once she became a grandmother, studied her grandchildren very closely, learned about who they really were and what their likes and dislikes were in a detailed way, and then she would make them a quilt that would be like their soul print in fabric. And the kids treasured the quilts that they got from their grandmother. Someone else told me that it wasn't until they were a teenager they ever heard the stories that Grandma used to be in a band. She was a singer in a band. And then all of a sudden, all of these memories of Grandma wanting to get in on karaoke at family parties made different sense. Sometimes in those conversations, faith comes up early. People will say, "My early memories of Dad are him kneeling down with me next to my bed at night to say prayers." Or, "Mom used to keep a little jar of holy water in the kitchen, and when we go to school, she would bless us." There's lots of other stories that people will tell too. They include things like, "Man, past 10 years, Mom lived to go to Turning Stone. She would say, 'Can you give me a ride out to Turning Stone or to Mohegan Sun?'" Those are charming stories too. They're different. Sometimes people will lead with, "Dad loved the Red Sox." If you want to know my dad, you have to know it was always about the Red Sox. Sometimes faith doesn't come up right away in those conversations. And if it doesn't come up at all, I always ask about it. I'll say, "Can you tell me a little bit about your mom's faith or your dad's faith?" And sometimes it's hard to get a read on that person because they'll say things like, "Well, you know, Mom definitely believed in God. I know that for sure. She definitely believed in God." Or they'll say things like, "You know, Dad believed in heaven, but he liked to keep those things real private." And I understand, but it doesn't give me much of a read on what faith really meant in that person's life. And sometimes I think it's interesting to hear people talk about their loved ones in that way because it sounds so different than what you would read in a Mother's Day card. Maybe you have been finding great Mother's Day cards to give out. The ones that Hallmark makes and other manufacturers, they have great little messages about, "You know, Mom, you're my best role model. Whenever I make a decision, I think, what would Mom do? You're so wonderful." Very few of those cards say things like, "Mom, I acknowledge that you exist. Happy Mother's Day. I prefer, Mom, to keep my feelings about you private, but here's a card." They don't say things like that. That wouldn't make the kind of impression that moms would like to hear. There's no cards that say, "Mom, we will get to spend eternity together someday, so for now, I'm going to spend my weekends at Turning Stone." And so that is something that we're being asked to consider today. Our belief in God is a good thing, but belief happens in the head. And so it doesn't contain a lot of love. If we're going to love God, we've got to go beyond belief, because belief can be a pretty basic level of connection with God. I recently listened to a podcast that involved an interview with somebody who was saying that when he was a teenager, he had no real connection with God. And the interviewer said, "Oh, so you didn't believe in God?" And the man said, "Oh no, I believed in God. But you've got to understand, church was so bland that believing in God or not believing in God, it just seemed like it didn't make any difference. Faith didn't make a big enough difference in life to not believe it. You just went with it. I saved my rebellion for better things than that." He said, "You just go to the classes, you don't like it, but then you get confirmed, and then you've got a picture with grandma, and everybody's happy. And nothing really happens, nothing changes." He said that changed when he was in college and got to go on a service trip to Kenya. He said the only reason he signed up for the trip was because there was a girl going on the trip that he liked, and he thought it was a good way to spend 2 weeks with her. But he said when he got there, it was life-changing, because he met people for the first time that viewed God completely differently than he did. He said for the people in Kenya, God was who they followed, not what they believed. God was someone they followed, not something they believed in. And that's what the readings are about today. Jesus is saying, I'm the one you follow. If you're following me, you're not going to have a hard time believing in me at all, because you'll be looking to me to find out what to do next. What happens this afternoon? What am I going to do tomorrow? What are my goals? If you're having trouble believing in me, it's probably a sign that you're not following me. Because if you're following me, there's nothing to doubt. Keep your eyes on me and let's go. Jesus is inviting us not to be what we believe in, but who we follow. And that shift changes everything in our lives. And then we start to have confidence. Oh, I will be able to find my way through the narrow places and through the dark nights because I have someone to follow. I'm not just trying to do it on my own with a vague belief of how it'll end up in the end. A parishioner who is very involved and volunteers quite a bit told me a story about a conversation she had with her 16-year-old son. She said to him after Mass one day, "Wouldn't it have been amazing if we could have known Jesus in person?" And her son said, "What do you mean?" She said, "Well, just think, wouldn't it have been amazing if we could go back in time and actually be his disciples and actually hear his word and follow it the way that they did?" And he said, "Mom, we are his disciples. We do follow what he says." And she smiled when she told me, "It took my 16-year-old son to point out something so obvious to me." Wasn't that humble of her to share that? I was thinking, wouldn't it have been great if I could have been an actual disciple? We are. That's what we're doing. That's what the goal is. This is what it sounds like when we are really following him and not just believing. Many of you might have heard by now that Father Tom Babiush, our pastor just to the east of us in Hudson Falls and Fort Edward, has been asked to take a new assignment by the bishop later this summer. He is going to be the pastor of 4 parishes in the Mohawk Valley. Hard assignment. So I saw him recently and I said, "Tom, how are you doing with that? How are you feeling?" And he said, "You know, when I was a kid growing up in Poland, I had no way to know that I was going to be a priest. And even if I'd known that, I would never have known that someday I would be across the ocean in Glens Falls, New York, with churches. He said, I don't know what it's going to be like to go out to the Mohawk Valley. He said, but one thing I do know, I've learned to trust my journey. Can some of you relate to that phrase? I've learned to trust my journey. God did not bring me this far to let me go now. I can trust. I can trust the path that I'm on. I don't know how long we've had it now, maybe 10 years or 15, but when GPS was new, a long time ago, I was too arrogant to listen to it a lot of times. I thought I was smarter. I would say, oh, come on, GPS, you don't know the side streets that I know. But I have been humbled by GPS. It knows more than I do. It knows that 3 traffic lights ahead, there's a car broken down in the right lane, blocking all of the vehicles. And I wouldn't know that. So if it tells me, listen, you'll thank me later, turn left here, I gotta listen to that. GPS is smarter than I am. And I think probably the group that has the very hardest time with this is actually mothers. It's probably mothers that have the hardest time with this lesson, because a mother cannot believe that anyone could know better for her child or could love that child more than she does. How could she ever believe that? So it would be natural for a mother to say, Lord, you can have dominion over the whole universe, it's no problem, but this kid, I'll be taking the wheel on this one. But that's what we're being invited to consider. That, unbelievable as it is, there is someone who loves our children even more than we do, who knows better what they need than we know. Because we will never outsmart and we will never outlove our good shepherd.